That's why the community needs Olelo TV. Olelo Community Media. That's why the community needs Olelo TV. Olelo Community Media.
Aloha, and thank you for tuning in to GMO Week, 4 nights of active discussion on this often divisive issue. We at Olelo Community Media hope that GMO Week will help all of us gain a better understanding of both the pros and cons of GMO so that our community can create solutions that are in the best interest of Hawaii. The GMO series is our first, but Olelo plans to air similar productions on important community issues in the future. We do not support any position on GMO, but we strongly believe that voices on both sides need to be heard. Freedom of speech and community engagement are what makes our country and our island community great. From all of us at Olelo, mahalo for watching.
Aloha, I'm Wayne Yoshioka. Thank you for tuning in to GMO Week on Olelo. By now, we hope you've been able to tune in to earlier discussions on both pro and anti-viewpoints on genetically modified organisms. You can always catch these program links by visiting olelo.org/GMO. This is our final night of discussion where our GMO panelists will be addressing your questions and concerns. We thank you for sending in your comments all week long on Facebook or at #OleloGMO. We have consolidated your input and feedback, and we'll start off with a few of your questions. If you're tuning in live, you can still join the discussion by tweeting or emailing comments to the tags at the bottom of your screen. At this time, I'd like to introduce our panelists. On the anti-GMO side, we have Dr. William Steiner, former Dean of the College of Agriculture, Forestry, and Natural Resource Management at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. Gary Hooser, member of the Kauai County Council, chair of the Agriculture and Intergovernmental Affairs Committee, and former state senator representing Kauai and Ni'ihau. And Bill Fries, science policy analyst with the Center for Food Safety, a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit group advocating sustainable agriculture. On the pro-GMO side, we have Dennis Gonzalez, retired director of the USDA Pacific Basin Agricultural Research Center in Hilo. Adolph Helm, farmer and former president, Hawaii Crop Improvement Association, and Dean Okimoto, owner of Nalo Farms and president of the Hawaii Farm Bureau Federation since 2004. Each side will have approximately 3 minutes to answer the question, and additional time will be allowed for any further clarification. Based on the 1 hour allotted for this show, we will have time for about 7 questions. Let's begin. Our first question is from Carol in Hilo via email, and it's to the anti-GMO folks. And here's the question. You said that the GMO companies are using pesticides that are dangerous. Please name at least 3 pesticides that are dangerous that are being used by these companies. What do you mean by dangerous? Can they be legally and safely applied by certified company employees?
You know, I'd like to talk about some of the chemicals that are found on Kauai, the district that I represent, and let the scientists talk about the dangers. And thank you, Wayne, for the introduction, and Olelo for doing this. You talked about the importance of information, and the community needs to be informed. And I've been trying to be informed on Kauai and had a very difficult time not getting the information when we asked the industry. So I did find out on Kauai there's over 22 restricted pesticides, restricted use pesticides, which are the worst of the worst. There's also experimental pesticide use permits, and we've been unable to find what those experimental pesticides are. But there's things like atrazine, paraquat, and there are tons of them, tons, 18 tons a year spent by the top 5 agricultural companies on Kauai year after year in our community. As to what these impacts of these pesticides are, I'll leave to the other gentleman.
Well, yeah, I think there are a number of hazardous pesticides that are being used on the islands and on Kauai. We know, for instance, chlorpyrifos is an insecticide that's in the restricted use category. And by the way, restricted use means a pesticide that's hazardous enough that it requires special training and a license to be able to apply. And what that means is that if you are exposed to it, it can be dangerous. And the applicators have special protective equipment, but if you're exposed to drift, you don't necessarily have that kind of protection. Chlorpyrifos is a nerve toxin, and it's been linked to attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, Parkinson's disease, and birth defects. The EPA knows this is a hazardous pesticide and actually has canceled its use in home and garden. So urban kids and suburban kids are protected, but not the rural kids.
If I could just jump in real quick, and on Kauai, no other farmer uses these except the seed companies and Kauai Coffee. So the only 5 top agribusinesses, real farmers that grow food to eat and food to export, on Kauai do not use these pesticides to any great extent whatsoever. I've got the data from the Department of Agriculture. This binder is just 5 of those pesticides and the labels. Some of these labels are 100 pages long. They're banned in Europe, they're banned in some states, and they're really, really bad.
It's true, Gary. Atrazine is banned in the European Union, and this is an herbicide that's actually been shown to change the sex of frogs, of male frogs. It transforms male frogs into female frogs at parts per billion level. So this is a really serious, herbicide, and it's also been linked to breast and prostate cancer. It really shouldn't be out there. It shouldn't be used, but it is. And then finally, paraquat, Gary mentioned. That's one of the most hazardous herbicides. Also a nerve toxin. It's actually used in medical research to simulate Parkinson's disease.
Well, thank you. A question for the pro-GMO panelists. They would like you to answer the same question. Name at least 3 dangerous pesticides used by GMO companies. What does dangerous mean? And can these pesticides be legally and safely applied by certified company employees?
Well, first of all, there's different classifications of pesticide, and what drives pesticide use is really driven off a process that we use. It's called the integrated pest management, and what it is basically it's incorporating all of the methodologies to that uses pest management control. And what drives us to use a crop protection pesticide is based on what the impacts of the pests on the crop that we're trying to grow. In this particular case, I'll use corn as an example, seed corn. And so with that said, we use many different classes of insecticide, not just restricted use pesticide. We use general pesticide. We use bioinsecticide, which is a really benign pesticide that adapts well to the environment. And so with that said, for us as seed farmers, we will always take the attempt to use the best methodologies to control the pests at the time that we need to control them. And so it doesn't mean that we use dangerous pesticide. It means we use the necessary pesticide for the particular pest that we're dealing with at that particular time.
Well, and a lot of it is that's why you have certified applications. I mean, the people that are approved to spray these things use full garb protection. But I mean, there are some non-restrictive use chemical pesticides that are just as poisonous as restricted use pesticides. I mean, I always tell people too, I mean, if you're an organic farmer, if you're using pyrethrins and things like that, which are natural pesticides, you're still required to use the full garb with face masks, the whole garb all the way down that protects you from these sprays, because even they're toxic. I mean, if I tell people that organic pesticides, if you drink a cap full of pyrethrin, it's just as lethal to you as a chemical pesticide. So, you know, I mean, part of it is the training that these applicators go through is really critical in making sure that they're used properly and used safely.
And to touch what Dean is just saying, it's prudent on our part to ensure all of our applicators are trained. And it's actually a good thing to have very responsible, trained personnel that are applying pesticide.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another question from Chris via email. Can the pro folks please explain why, if GMO is so safe, so good for us, why has Japan, Korea, and most of Europe banned GMO crops?
Yeah, I'll answer that. You know, Japan is not banned GMO crops. In fact, the genetically engineered papaya was just allowed into Japan in December of 2011. And the Japan agencies categorically stated that it was safe for consumption and safe for the environment. So, you know, this genetically engineered papaya that had been eaten and grown in the Hawaii and in the United States have been for 15 years, and so Japan showed that it will accept it.
Yeah, and with that too, a lot of the European nations may ban genetic modification products, but in some cases, and it depends on the country itself, they allow genetic modified feed for their animals and hogs, such as, you know, cattle, hogs, and poultry to consume genetic engineering feed, and allow that to go through the process, and the end product goes to the market but is not labeled. So you really got to take it from a case-by-case basis, on a country-by-country basis, on really how the ban and the policy around that is designed.
And you know, the European nations also operate on a different type of, as far as food safety is concerned, they operate on the precautionary principle, where since the mad cow disease happened, you know, they followed more of a precautionary principle of being cautious rather than jumping into things right away. So they want to see effects first, and that's part of why they're not allowing some of these things yet.
Yeah, mind you, there's over 400 million acres of some genetic engineering crop grown all over the world.
But we also, you know, you also need to know that the U.S. system of verifying food safety, I think, is the safest in the world. I mean, not only I think it's well known, you know, worldwide that it is the safest food system in the world.
And you know, the European countries themselves have done their own studies analyzing the GMO crops, and they've concluded that this is safe, that it is safe. Even though they don't allow it into the country, they have concluded that that is safe.
Thank you. Anti-GMO, can the pro folks, can the anti-GMO folks please explain why, if GMO is so safe, so good for us, why has Japan, Korea, and most of Europe banned GMO crops?
Well, let me start off first by saying that it's not totally true that all the data has shown that that these things are safe in Europe. There's now 19 animal studies that show that consuming genetically modified corn, for example, can lead to significant organ disruption in rodents and in pigs. And there's now additional studies, one of which just came out not too long ago, about a month ago, which shows that this is also true in Australia, where they analyze pigs, and one recently in the Midwest in this country, which showed the same thing. One of the key factors in these studies was allowing these animals to feed several generations on this type of food. And so it was an accumulation process and possibly something else going on too. So it definitely needs more study. And I think it's those kind of findings that make the European countries back off from totally accepting GMO organisms.
You know, the precautionary principle, I think, is a good one. And I think we live in a state, and it's an island. We have the greatest number of endangered species here. We only get one shot at protecting our environment, protecting our air and our soil and our water. So I think our state and my community certainly should echo Europe. And I applaud them for doing that, for being cautious up front. In our community, I'm concerned because they're experimenting. They're experimenting with genetically modified products that they won't tell us about. Things that aren't approved for release into the environment, things that aren't approved for human consumption. And those are impacts that, on our island and our community here and now.
Yeah, and I think it's really, it's misleading to say that we have, you know, a safe, you know, a regulatory system that really looks closely at these crops. I've actually done a lot of study in this area. I have a peer-reviewed paper on safety testing and regulation of genetically engineered foods that was published in 2004. My co-author was an eminent cell biologist from the Salk Institute, Dave Schubert. And when I look at that system, I see something that's full of holes. Our Food and Drug Administration does not even require that companies come to it in order to get a crop on the market. It's a voluntary consultation process. So what it means is that the companies go to FDA if they want to and share summary data with the FDA, but the FDA does not approve genetically engineered crops as safe. They simply say, well, Monsanto, you say this crop is safe, and we have no further questions. And this is the real state of our, you know, regulatory system.
I would add one other thing to that also, and that is that the precautionary principle allows time to continue to do studies that might expose problems later on, which is why the principle should be used.
Okay, thank you. We have a question for the anti-GMO folks from Linda from Kalaheo, Kauai, and this was via telephone. Why aren't GMO companies mandated to label food products containing GMO ingredients? And why are they allowed to spray pesticides, herbicides at random without regulation?
Well, that's a good question. My organization is the Center for Food Safety, and we support sustainable agriculture, and we're also a watchdog group on new agricultural technologies like biotechnology. So one of the things that we've done is several months ago we submitted a legal petition to the FDA, and we said, FDA, based on the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, you should be labeling genetically engineered foods. It should be mandatory labeling. And we've actually tried this a decade ago. This is a new effort. There's been a refusal. So far, the FDA has not responded to our petition. We think we have a very strong case. There's a material change in the food when you genetically engineer it. So that it's unfortunate, but I think what it comes down to is the power of the biotechnology industry, Monsanto and DuPont and these other companies that have prevented labeling thus far. There have been a number of state initiatives to get labeling because the feds aren't doing anything. And in fact, California had a very close vote. Labeling was narrowly voted down. And just recently, a number of states have passed provisional labeling legislation, Maine, Connecticut, and Vermont, that will go into effect if a few other states in the region agree to it. So,
I think that, you know, the right to know whether it's labeling what you're eating or what's being sprayed in your community, what's being grown in your community. We know, because I did a lot of research and had to pay money to the Department of Ag to get the info. The seed industry is spraying and applying 18 tons of restricted use pesticides in our community, but we don't know what those impacts are. And we have a bill before the Kauai County Council to require them to disclose and ask that they not spray next to schools, hospitals, and children. And the industry turned out in force to oppose that. And these are restricted use pesticides. As Mr. Okamoto said, they're the kind of pesticides people wear garb. These are banned in other countries, and they will say they're overregulated, but there's no law to require them to disclose what they're spraying to a pregnant woman or a teacher or a doctor. We have 5 pediatricians, a former head of Wilcox Hospital, signed testimony supporting this disclosure. We have the Hawaii State Teachers Association, concerned about teachers, concerned about students in the schools, testifying in support. The community needs the right to know. They need the right to know what these pesticides are, what impacts they're having on our community, where they're being sprayed. And it's a fundamental right, and the industry, unfortunately, is fighting that. And we're looking for a community that we can all live in together, that's healthy, that's sustainable, that protects our environment. And this is the fundamental issue in Kauai County, and I believe around our state.
Okay, thank you. Pro-GMO, same question. Why aren't GMO companies mandated to label food products containing GMO ingredients? And why are they allowed to spray pesticides, herbicides at random without regulation?
Well, fundamentally, and I'm going to look to what governs our safety food process, and you know, I take the side of the fact that I would put my trust into a system, a regulatory system, such as the FDA, that addresses the safety of our food. And fundamentally, they said there's, you know, substantial equivalency, you know, in terms of the nutritional value of a GE crop and a conventional crop. And also it has some unique, you know, guidelines to it where it's able to address toxicity levels, allergenistic things that you really can't do on conventional products that are produced by conventional farmers. So I would put my trust in a regulatory system that has been working and go that route, than to develop one that is outside of that regulatory framework.
You know, a lot of this too, I mean, it's not random, and it's not, it is regulated. It's highly regulated. The rules of spraying pesticides, you can't spray if the winds are more than 10 miles an hour, I think, right, Adolf?
Yep.
Things like that are taken into account before you can spray. You can be cited for spraying in those conditions. So, you know, that's not true, one, okay, straight off. And then on the labeling issue, you know, a lot of it is, if we're gonna label at a state level, okay, the problem is the amount of people that you have that are gonna incur the cost of labeling. And it's not the label itself. It's, okay, who's gonna go out and tell Western Oil or Kellogg from the state of Hawaii that you got to have a GMO label on your product, one, okay? And for 1.4 million people in Hawaii, what are they going to say? I mean, as opposed to the nation. And that's why, I mean, we're not really opposed to labeling. It's voluntary labeling is fine. What Whole Foods is doing is, I think, a great thing. But as far as looking at it as something to spread out the costs, nationally it will be spread enough because you have to hire people to monitor. So, I mean, just to monitor these products and ask these companies, do you have GMO products in your product? It's an exorbitant cost, and I don't think it's cost effective, and I don't think the people of Hawaii can stand to bear the burden of that cost.
Thank you. We have Hyung Bu via Twitter. She asks the pro-GMO folks, GMO labeling isn't about raising awareness, it's about state-sponsored negative advertising.
State-sponsored negative advertising.
It must have been from the pro-GMO folks that this question came, right?
Well, I really don't understand that very well, but I would say with labeling, you know, we went through this with the papaya, and we went through FDA, and you know, my take is if the federal government says to label, no problem. I mean, we have no problem with that. And with labeling, actually, they look at the equivalence. Now, if you develop a genetically engineered crop that has, and maybe good for the humans, that has 20% more vitamin C, they'll label it. They'll label it because it is sufficiently different from the non-genetically engineered crop. So it's about that if you created something that is significantly different in their standards, then they will label it. But, you know, it's probably better for the humans, but they will say this is a genetically engineered crop.
You know,
So it had nothing to do about hiding anything. They analyze if it's functionally significant to the non-GMO crop.
and even, you know, the papayas going into Japan are labeled, and they require the labeling. But it's a significantly different situation than labeling all products that have GMOs on our shelves in Hawaii or in the United States, because that's one item. Okay, so there's no need for monitoring, for one. It's whatever papayas are coming in from rainbow papayas. If they're called rainbow papayas, they're labeled GMO, right? But when you're looking at the full spectrum of food that comes into Hawaii, you know, our beef, our pork, those types of things are fed GMO crops. How far do you go down the road? My understanding, you know, is even in oils, there aren't conclusive tests to tell you whether, because they're so close to what's being produced already, they're not conclusive tests to tell you whether it's GMO or not. So, you know, I mean, that's how close it is to the real thing at some point.
Yeah, and I go back to what I mentioned in the previous panel discussion about the idea of doing a feasibility study. To me, we really got to look at that seriously, because there's implications, and those implications could be far-reaching. And we have to look at it from all aspects, you know, the constitutionality side of it, the economic practicality of it, and we have to consider the farmers that are currently producing and growing, and the grocery manufacturers that have to bring these products in.
Thank you. Anti-GMO. Is labeling nothing have to do with raising awareness, but is it a state-sponsored negative advertising?
Well, you know, Wayne, that's interesting, because if these crops are really as wonderful as Monsanto and the other companies claim, they should be happy to label them, right? And then advertise the wonderful benefits, right? It should be something positive. I understand what the questioner is saying here, that it's negative advertising, but that's just, I think, trying to really twist the matter here. Again, if you're proud of your product, you advertise it, and you give people the right to choose, right? That's a fundamental business principle. It's kind of a bedrock principle of America, right? We're a very commercial nation. And it's really interesting. Business Week over a decade ago came out with an op-ed or an editorial that I'll never forget, and they're basically just frustrated with the biotech industry and said, why don't you just agree to label? You know, try to get rid of the suspicion and label. And then recently in Forbes, I saw a similar op-ed. So even the business community is trying to tell the biotech industry to open up.
And I would agree. I mean, why don't just say new and improved, genetically modified, whatever, you know, come buy our products? I mean, well, why do we need to hide whether it's genetically modified or not? And the state of Hawaii could write a similar law like Connecticut did. When other states, when there's critical mass, then we join in. You know, the cost factor, you know, it's labeled lots of other places, and cost, I believe, is a red herring. And speaking as a consumer, I don't want functionally equivalent or I want identical. Okay, and like was said here, that's how close it is to the real thing. I don't want something close to the real thing. I want the real thing. And I think most consumers do. 90%, I think, or more want to have the choice. They want to know whether they're buying the real thing or whether they're not.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there may be reasons not to label. For example, just recently this year, regulators discovered a hidden viral gene in a commercial GMO crop that apparently the industry might have known was already there and probably should have picked it out from the gene sequences that they have to to report when they do these studies and do these experiments. And that certainly would cause people not to buy product if they knew it was there. So one has to be kind of, I guess, cautious about how you approach this. And if you're not labeling, but you want to sell a lot of seeds, you might not want people to know that something like that is there. So one has to be careful, I think. There's the problem also of the side effects that occur with these things, like the increase in super weeds by the use of herbicide-resistant plants and the spraying of herbicides that follow. So again, there's a negative impact there. And I've heard now recently that there's a lot of farmers beginning to think about moving away and back to the traditional methods of farming to get away from these, using these organisms.
I want to take
Well,
just 10 seconds.
Okay, wait. I think there's a lot of questions about GMO labeling. Let's give the pro folks 1 minute, and then we'll give them a rebuttal also.
Yeah. You know, in regards to the papaya, you talked to Derek Carice when it was first developed. In his store, he had, this is genetically engineered papaya, this is non-genetically engineered papaya, and everybody bought it, and the genetically engineered papaya. And he said, you know, there's no need to label. These people love it. And, you know, people know that the rainbow papaya is genetically engineered. You know that it's genetically engineered. And, you know, it represents 80% of the production. If the consumers don't want it, it would not be like that.
You know, and the other point is, on labeling, it's not the seed corn companies that are going to be required to label. It's the farmers. That's where it's going to be at the farm level. So you affect farming. You talk about sustainability. You talk about supporting farmers, and we want to do more regulations on them. Doesn't make sense.
Can I add to that?
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Labeling.
I mean, I totally agree that the cost issue is a total red herring. This has been raised a number of times in ballot initiatives in California where, by the way, Monsanto and other agribusiness companies put in tens of millions of dollars to defeat labeling in California, and they're doing the same in other states. This is unconscionable. There are, you know, very positive tests to detect genetically engineered food, so that's not an issue, as someone said a moment ago. And, you know, I would also say that the issue is not just what you can see, it's unintended effects that you can't measure. And that's one of the things that we recommended in our paper, that you need to use sophisticated testing techniques that can detect unintended changes like elevated levels of native toxins, all right, that aren't tested by the normal, in the normal course of things. So, yeah, I mean, labeling is definitely right to give people a choice. They deserve a choice. And it's also, I think, good to give people a choice to avoid these foods.
Okay, one more round on GMO labeling. Is there middle ground for both sides?
Well, just to get back to the comment about why we're not, you know, so excited about labeling GMO products. But I just go back what Dean said, you know, it's really the small farmer that's going to get impacted the most. And in this particular case, I give you an example, you know, and I give credit again to the anti-GMO movement and their good work with the propaganda and the fear that they've addressed behind GMOs for the past decade. And so why would any small papaya farmer be so enthusiastically raising their hands and say, I don't have a problem with labeling? Well, already there's a perception that GMO, with the kind of propaganda that they're using, is people aren't going to buy GMO. So let's be logic about that, you know.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wouldn't call finding a hidden viral gene in a gene sequence in genetically modified organisms propaganda. It's fact. Let's get right down to that. You know, people do have a right to have a choice. I think that's true. I think you would want to have a choice if you were going to buy something that you knew might harm you. And I think that's true of anybody else too. People don't know. Maybe it's an education program that's needed. Maybe it's the fact that these companies need to come out with their records and show us what they're doing. They haven't come forth and done that. Like Gary was saying, he's had to go and do every possible thing he could and even pay to get records from those folks. So it is a problem. It's something that's not transparent.
And I don't know any small farmers in my district in Kauai County that would have complained about this issue or lobbied against labels. They're complaining about the seed companies driving up the cost of land.
Thank you. I guess there is no happy medium on this issue. To the anti-GMO folks, how will the anti-GMO factions provide a solution for feeding the 10 billion people of the world? And this comes from Joni via Twitter.
Well, this is a good question because it kind of strikes at the heart of something that I've been wanting to say throughout this forum, and that is being labeled anti. All right, because Center for Food Safety is a group that supports sustainable agriculture. We're mostly about supporting organic and other forms of sustainable agriculture. As part of that mission, we look at certain agricultural technologies that take us in the wrong direction, such as genetic engineering. And we oppose those methods, but it's in the service of a positive vision of sustainable ag. So I think the question is based on a widespread myth that genetic engineering is somehow feeding the world or necessary to feed the world. And this myth really bothers me because it is based on no facts whatsoever. This is an industry that's been around for a quarter of a century, since the late 80s when they first started doing field testing. And they've been promising increased yields and reduced hunger and curing malnutrition, for all of that time. And in fact, what they've come up with are almost exclusively crops that are associated with increased pesticide use. All right, and these are the herbicide-resistant crops, Roundup Ready at present, that are resistant to Roundup herbicide, and they invite greater use of these chemicals. And that's why we've seen in the 16 years that biotech has been around commercially, since 1996, we've seen 404 million pounds more pesticides being used because of the introduction of these crops. This is a peer-reviewed paper by Charles Benbrook. It came out in 2012. And again, this is what this agriculture does. It leads to increased dependence on pesticides, not increased yields. The Union of Concerned Scientists did a great study called Failure to Yield, which demonstrated conclusively that genetic engineering doesn't increase yield. What's happened is there's been increased emphasis on conventional breeding, the kind that's always been done, and that's responsible for yield increases. There are many sustainable techniques that don't involve genetic engineering, agroecological techniques that I know Dr. Steiner here is working on, that really do offer promise in that direction.
That's correct. The FAO came out with a recent report and a recent study that suggested that we needed to concentrate on those kind of techniques because of the small number of small farm holders that are out there in the undeveloped world. And those people really can't afford pesticides. They can't even afford fertilizers. And to increase their food, they're going to have to go to agroecological methods that bring together environmental and plant and soil and do an integrated type of approach to agriculture. And that's what we need.
Thank you. Same question. How will the pro-GMO factions provide a solution, or anti-GMO factions provide a solution for feeding 10 billion people? I guess that's the question.
I'd like to correct the myth that was just mentioned that, genetic engineering is spraying more chemicals and all of this stuff. This genetically engineered papaya, that thing is the most sustainable thing that you try to produce an organic papaya in Puna. That virus will wipe you out. And you know what a lot of people can do? What they want to do? The virus comes here, and what do? They want to clear forests to escape the virus. Now, that is the worst thing you want to do. You don't want to clear the forest, but you can raise this genetically engineered papaya right there, and it's absolutely resistant. Small farmers, they're surviving because of that. So, you know, to hear that it's a myth of more chemicals and all this stuff, and I'm part of a project to develop a cassava, a very important starch crop for Africa, that to help control the cassava brown streak mosaic virus and the cassava mosaic virus. Excellent progress is made. Now, that thing will have no strings attached. Now, you talk about helping people. Now, that exactly helps people. And when you spread the myth that, oh my God, this is genetic engineering, so it's all bad, you only encourage to really make these poor people suffer.
You know, the other point too is we just had 5 farmers from across the nation that we brought in. And these are farmers that use the genetically modified organisms as a tool where they live and grow. And we had one young lady from North Dakota who was pregnant, had 4 kids. And one of her questions was straight out to people that were anti is, why would I, as a family person, try to grow something that's going to hurt anybody? And this is the attitude of a lot of farmers, by the way, that we take, I mean, a lot of them take offense that they believe that, you know, they're trying to hurt them, one. And then she also said, you know, this tool saved their farm because they've gone from where 10 years ago it was 40 bushels an acre yield to 80 bushels a year. So she said, now we're actually able to buy the things that other people whose kids are lawyers or whatever can buy their kids. I mean, you know, it's why can't farmers make money at some point? You know, and these are the tools that if you take it away from farmers, we become less and less able to do what we have to do to grow food.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think we're all in agreement that we have to look at, you know, all the practices for sustainability in feeding the larger population. We think the idea of organic farming is great. That's awesome. Sustainable farming is awesome. But biotech should be in that equation too.
Okay. Let's move on to our next question. We have Thelma via Twitter. She says, Bill 79 would hurt papaya and other farmers. Why are GMO opponents on the Big Island pitting farmers against farmers?
You know, it really saddens me, really, when this bill is introduced to ban papaya. At first it said, you know, you can grow papaya, but you got to be under BLS3 conditions. And then now they're modifying that. 750 feet isolation. And you know, it boggles my mind that for 15 years we've been doing this. We've analyzed this whole papaya for its safety and all of this stuff. And now they want to say this is not safe. I think a lot of that has to do with philosophy. You know, if you don't like GMOs, that's fine. But don't say that they're not safe and all of this stuff if you have no evidence for that. And that's what Bill 79 is doing.
You can, I mean, I'll give you a good example on Kauai because Councilman Hoosier, really, I talked to people at grow farms, and they basically told me that they've been trying to lease out over 1,000 acres of land in Mahalipu Valley, and they have no takers. And they've gone to the point where they have gone down to $250 per acre per year. Now, the going price on OAHU, well, and I'll tell you what, the seed corn guys are paying $700 per year, per acre on Kauai. So, you know, in talking to them, they told me, you know, we want to help small farmers. We want more small farmers to help. But he said, the kinds of people that come sometimes are some people that want to do cooperatives. They come with no business plan, or they can't find farmers. I mean, seriously, you know, I think the issue of agriculture on the outer islands is more an issue of transportation and labor and the capacity you have on the outer islands because you don't have, you know, hundreds of thousands of people to feed. So you got to get it to Oahu. Transportation is a major problem in growing agriculture on the outer islands, and that is a huge thing.
Yeah, and the issue with legislation and ordinance that is going on in the Big Island and currently in Kauai that Gary had recently introduced, is the fact that it really starts to set precedent. And it's really, to me, a downward spiral of agriculture in general here in Hawaii. And unfortunately, the ones that get impacted are really those that really want to farm, those that are currently farming. And mind you, people aren't standing in line today and saying, I want to farm. Let's go educate the farmers and get them the skills and knowledge they need in order to farm and make it work that way. Let's push our efforts towards that.
Bill 79.
You know, I believe, I'm working on an ordinance on Kauai, which is different from Bill 79, but I believe the people in Hawaii County are concerned that their county will end up like Kauai County. The seed industry dominates the landscape there. 15,000 acres of the best agricultural land in the entire county. The land with the water, the land with the infrastructure. And this is not a myth, okay? This is not an internet story. 18 tons of restricted use pesticides every single year, year after year after year, and nobody knows what those impacts are because they haven't been disclosed, they haven't been studied. 18 tons. No other farmer, okay, no other small farmer on Kauai uses that kind of volume, not even a tiny bit. That's 99%. And so I know for a fact, I've got the information, the GMO industry uses far more pesticides than traditional farming in my county. I've seen that over and over again. And we're trying to just simply say, tell us the truth. Tell us what you're doing. And they don't want to do it. We're saying, don't do it next to schools and hospitals. And they say, no, we don't want any more rules. It's just flabbergasts me that the industry will not tell the community the information they need to make good decisions. That's what we're trying to do here. That's what we're trying to do on Kauai. And I think that's what the people of Hawaii County ultimately want to do.
I was under the impression that your GMO papaya that you developed, Dennis, was actually grandfathered into that bill so that it would carry through and be able to be grown. But I think the reason that the boundary sets are there was to prevent pollen flow to organic flower growers who were afraid that they might get genetically contaminated from GMO papaya. Those are valid complaints because it's happened all over the country with other organic farmers and other crops. So it's a concern. And I don't know, we don't know what's going to happen with the bill or what's going to come in terms of amendments to it. But we do know that there are some concerned people out there that want to find out what's happening and try and control what's happening to some extent. I think Gary has a good point when he points out that some of that bill is supposed to stop other organic crops from coming in. There was an attempt a while back, a number of years back now, to bring in biotech algae to make pharmaceuticals, and there was a serious concern about that one because we had no idea what might escape from that and how it would affect people directly.
Yeah, and I would add also, I know several wonderful farmers on the Big Island, coffee growers, and they were very concerned about the cross-pollination issue. And as Bill said, it's happened again and again with various crops on the mainland being contaminated and costing farmers, in some cases, hundreds of millions of dollars.
Thank you. At this time, we'd like to give each panelist 1 minute for closing remarks, but I'd like them to answer this simple question. Can we coexist? And let's start with you, William Steiner.
I believe we can coexist. The serious problem is that we need more research. We need to know exactly what the impacts are. We need to know exactly how these things are going to escape. Here's a recent paper, discover a new route for a genetically modified gene escape. And it's basically just escape from a genetic material from wounds on plants or on animals. And going to other animals that rub up against it or other plants that might be in the area. So that's a serious concern, is the escape aspect of genetically modified plants. I think the approach that really is needed, though, is one that's an agroecological approach. And the reason I say that is because we need to take a long-term look at where we're going with agriculture. We need to look 100 years out and not 10 years out.
Thank you very much. Dean Okimoto, can we coexist?
I believe so. I mean, I think you know, the promotion, our organic industry here is very weak. It's not very big. I want to grow the organic industry, truthfully, because when we look at our borders, we don't protect our borders. And the things that invasives come in on the most are organic produce that comes in. So absolutely, I would want to help the organic industry. I think the seed corn industry understands that too, because they got to deal with these pests also as conventional farmers. So, you know, we have so many other problems with land, with water, with labor, transportation issues, and yet we go back to the mode of farming. At some point, yeah, I do think we should sit down and be able to talk about this, because at the end of the day, what I fear is when you start talking about all of these things, these tools for farmers, you're affecting farmers, and not the seed corn companies. You're affecting that farmer out in the Midwest. You're affecting farmers here because our inputs come in on the piggyback of what the seed corn guys bring in.
Thank you. Gary Hooser?
You know, I think we can coexist. I think it'll be a challenge, and I think we need to keep our eye on the prize. We need to think about why we're here, and what the people of our state and our communities want. And I think they want sustainability. They want clean soil, clean water. They want to know their health is intact. And right now, they don't know that. They don't know that. And so I think to coexist, we need to have the industry has to be more forthright. They need to tell our community. And we're trying to pass a law to make them do it because they won't do it voluntarily. That's the frustrating part. They need to tell the community what practices they're using, what chemicals they're using, where they're using it. And it's a matter of scale. This is a 15,000 acres, and our community is huge. And small farmers are not using these chemicals. I'll say that over and over again. They are not using these restricted use pesticides to any degree of significance whatsoever. And I've got the data, but we can. But I think we need to look at the fundamental thing, not how much money we're making, not what's good for our business, but what's good for our community, what's good for the environment and the health of our people. And we need to look 7 generations out, not on tomorrow's bottom line for major corporations.
Thank you, Gary. Adolph Helm?
Well, I've always been a proponent for coexistence and working together, and I would hope Gary would, you know, as part of his role as a councilman and other policymakers, is to encourage that kind of discussion where you can get everybody on the table and have those discussions that are realistic, and that you can set some goals that benefit everyone in the state of Hawaii. Hey, we're all Hawaii over here. We Kekeokaina over here. We're born and raised. We lived in Hawaii a long time. We all care for this island. We all care. And the fact of the matter is to address Gary's concern about, you know, not being open or transparent. You know, I believe we are, and I'm saying that for the seed farmers across Hawaii. And we've offered Gary opportunity to visit the operations over in Kauai. You know, we wrote letters personally to him to kind of address our concern about his request, because it all falls under a process that we are following. It's the regulatory process, and we disclose everything that we have to do under that framework. And Gary was welcome to come and visit the locations to discuss those issues.
Thank you. Bill Freeze?
Yeah, coexistence is, I think, a really good concept, and I wish it could work, and there may be possibilities for it, but for it to work, there has to be responsibility taken on both sides. And, you know, in our experience, the biotechnology companies haven't been willing to take that responsibility. For instance, if you're a conventional or organic grower and you're contaminated through cross-pollination from a biotech crop, you lose markets, all right? And that's happened again and again. Farmers, hardworking farmers, have lost lots of money because of the irresponsibility of the biotech companies. And so take responsibility, accept liability. That would be a first step towards coexistence. But I would also add that can we really have coexistence with bad agricultural practice that's harming us all, with poisoning our environment, with more pesticide use, as we're seeing, with, you know, declining seed choice, as, you know, some of these large companies offer fewer and fewer conventional seeds. You know, we need coexistence, fine, but let's have responsibility as well.
Thank you. Dennis Gonzalez?
Yeah, you know, I'm all for coexistence, and I've practiced coexistence. To ship papaya to Japan, we had non-genetically engineered papaya right next to genetically engineered papaya, and they could ship it to Japan with no problem. We did gene flow studies, and 12 feet away is 0.4%. You go 50 feet away, there's nothing. Now, using that information, if people really want to coexist, no problem. But if someone say, and Bill would know, hey, I cannot have any gene flow, then absolutely the attitude is no coexistence. So listen to what had been done with papaya. You know why we did the gene flow studies? So that people could see statistically the range of gene flow. And we've also used programs, if people want to utilize non-genetically engineered papaya, one way to really not get wiped out by the virus is you surround it by genetically engineered papaya. That is coexistence. Non-genetically engineered papaya will get wiped out by the virus in Puna.
Well, thank you all. I think we're out of time. Mahalo to our panelists, Adolph, Dennis, Dean, Bill, William, and Gary, for giving us insight and perspective on the road ahead for GMO in Hawaii. This topic needs open discussion and dialogue, but more importantly, residents and communities around the state need to be informed in order to make thoughtful decisions about GMO and seek ways for all of us to work together collectively, collaboratively, and responsibly in taking the next steps towards addressing our concerns surrounding GMO. And it could well be an evolution, a revolution, or both. It is up to all of us to decide. And we can all do our part by staying informed and engaged. Be sure to visit olelo.org/GMO to view other GMO Week programs or to visit links provided by our panelists. I'm Wayne Yoshioka for GMO Week. On behalf of Olelo Community Media, mahalo for tuning in.
Aloha, and thank you for tuning in to GMO Week, 4 nights of active discussion on this often divisive issue. We at Olelo Community Media hope that GMO Week will help all of us gain a better understanding of both the pros and cons of GMO so that our community can create solutions that are in the best interest of Hawaii. The GMO series is our first, but Olelo plans to air similar productions on important community issues in the future. We do not support any position on GMO, but we strongly believe that voices on both sides need to be heard. Freedom of speech and community engagement are what makes our country and our island community great. From all of us at Olelo, mahalo for watching.
To the right is soda weighing 250 pounds. To the left we have water weighing 5 pounds. Are you ready to rumble? Pow! Never mess with the water. No sugar.
No calories.
Go, go, water. You're going down hard. Kapow! Boo, boo, soda. I'm not giving up. Wow. 1, 2, 3.
And the winner is water.
Go, go.